Buyers only want to pay for the things that they know they have a high certainty of retaining, which makes sense, or they're going to mitigate their risk by making an offer that's lower.
Welcome to Business Refocused, a podcast about the people, decisions, and strategies behind building a successful business. Each week, we talk with leaders and operators about what they're learning, what's working, and the challenges that come with growth. I'm Lindsay Sexton, and I'm happy to introduce you to my co-host, who just so happens to be my mom, Carey Wallace. Let's get into it.
What would you say are the three most common issues you uncover through working with a new agency client?
Yeah. So, I think in our world, agents talk to each other and they form in their own minds what their agencies are worth or what the strength of their agent. They think it's a one size fits all. I don't think they really believe that, but the way that they communicate with each other, it would lead you to believe that they think, well, if Matt's agency is worth this and we're basically the same size, my agency must also be worth that. And I think one of the most common things is going through the valuation process and realizing it's not that simple. And sometimes that means they're pleasantly surprised and their agency is actually more valuable than what they thought. More oftentimes they realize, oh goodness, I didn't realize there's risk inside my agency because I'm so busy running the business, I haven't actually considered looking at the business the same way. So I'd say the first thing is really getting a clear picture of what the value is and what my agency's particular risk areas are. The second would be the impact of producer-owned books. I hate when I have to be the bearer of bad news to say, hey, here's the reality. Because you have this contract that's super nebulous and not very clear to anyone, or no contract and have a 1099 producer that has a comp structure that looks like a duck and acts like a duck and really appears that that's a producer-owned book, this is the impact that it's going to have on your agency if and when you decide to contemplate selling. That's sometimes shocking for people because many years ago, that was the thought process of how do you attract great producers is you give them partial ownership in a book, and the difference of partial ownership in the agency versus partial ownership in a book and how different the outcome can be for everyone, actually. So that would be number two. What's your value? What do these producer-owned books have? What's the impact? The third one is I signed a contract with a aggregator, cluster, or alliance, and I didn't realize, I knew why I signed it because I wanted access to markets or I wanted something I couldn't get on my own, and I signed it 30 years ago. And what I don't know is there's some barriers in that contract to do what I might want to do. I think there's just things that, man, I did that so long ago and I didn't realize what that meant now in my agency today. So I think those are some of the big things that come through the onboarding process that we dig in and look at the agency a little differently. And they're all fixable. They're all things we can work through. And the earlier you identify these things, the more options you have. The challenge is if you wait and get a valuation 6 months before you want to sell your agency, there is no time to rectify that. And you're this is what it is, and your options become much less. So I would prefer to have at least 5 years prior to anything, prior to an internal transition, an external transition, whatever that might be. Please give yourself a runway just to get a gut check on your agency. Yeah.
There's so much gold right there with what you said. So let's try to unpack a little bit of each of those. The first one, the valuation piece, understanding their value, but also how that value is derived.
Yeah.
Could you help touch on some of, in your opinion, the most impactful value drivers?
Sure.
Not just how a business is valued in terms of a multiple of EBITDA, but like what you think really drives value at an agency that maybe others wouldn't see.
Yeah, I think the easy ones are: is it growing? Is it profitable? Right? And if you have an agency that's growing, it's doing it profitably, it's going to be more valuable than agencies that are not doing those two things. That's kind of like, here's the bar, we stepped over it. The question is it transferable? And most people get tripped up in this. So let's say I have an agency and I'm growing, but all the growth is coming from one producer that's 70 years old. That's not transferable. At some point, the performance of this agency is going to change because it's hinged on a person that's beyond retirement age. Now, let's say that same person is now the owner of the agency and they have all the relationships with the carriers. They have all the relationships, period, and all the staff will only want to work for this guy. This risk became much greater. So you have to look at what's driving the performance inside an agency. And are there areas that if it changes, the performance or the predictability of the performance changes with it? Same scenario. Let's say there's two producers also at retirement age. Their account managers are also going to retire and they have niche books. The likelihood someone's going to hold on to those books in that agency is pretty low if they don't have the expertise in order to know how to deal with those clients. So what is the awareness of all the team, not just one person on the team? And do they have the talent, knowledge, ability in order to accurately serve those clients? There's a lot of drivers that have nothing to do with numbers on a page, and it has to do with what can you expect this agency to continue to do into perpetuity if a carrier relationship changes, a niche market changes, people change, the ownership changes. And those are the things that you just don't think about, you know?
That speaks directly to the importance of finding the right partner when you are considering selling. Because so often we see just what you said, like a producer-owned book an agency that's growing because of one producer, an owner that wants to part ways after the sale, a niche that one account manager has expertise in, and that's it. And the risk of transfer is significant, but if you find a buyer who has that capacity and the knowledge base experience, they're going to be much more comfortable with acquiring that asset because they can maintain it, retain it. Yeah. And so if you don't talk to that buyer, that right one, you're going to get a discounted value or not even get a good offer.
That's
so
right.
That's really well said. Do you find that how much leadership influences the value of a business in terms of experience, tenure, maybe age to retirement or for exit?
Yeah, I think anytime I have to put myself in the buyer's shoes when I'm asking that question. So the answer is it depends, because the team around you could really change. And if the actual leader is not in the day-to-day, it's less impactful to what that outcome will be. But if the leader is not investing in the agency, not staying up with changes, how customers are changing, investing in technology and investing in processes to be competitive in this environment, that agency is going to fall behind other agencies that are performing differently. So I think the ability to continue to be competitive will change that, regardless if he or she is not the main producer or the main relationship. I think the general environment and culture of that agency will be different. So I think you can stay too long and it'll impact the value of an agency. That varies agency to agency. We're talking in general terms, but you and I both know you've got to dig into every single agency to know what that impact will be. And it makes it really important to have someone with perspective that's seen multiple buyers, multiple agencies, to know what is that true impact to this specific agency. So yeah, it's kind of a loaded question, but yeah, I think it definitely impacts it for sure.
The second thing you mentioned was having a producer-owned book or partial-owned book. I see that all the time too, and it is a really difficult conversation because someone thinks they're worth $10 and they're actually worth 3 because of the ownership is really rooted in the producer, or at least a lot of it.
Yeah.
Is there a strategy that has worked, in your opinion, better than others in terms of righting that ship over time? Because that can't be done right away, but have you seen something work better than other?
Yeah, I think the thing that's been most successful in my experience is, number one, are the producers that have producer-owned books, where are they in their career? And do they have aspirations of staying with the agency or becoming a future owner of the agency? If that's the case, and both parties agree that that's the case, you can change a producer-owned book into minority ownership or phantom stock or something that takes the complexity out of it, and it becomes a win-win for both the owner of the agency and the owner of the producer-owned book, because the parts sometimes and most times are not as valuable as the whole. So if we can get in there and demonstrate that to both sides, that's a win-win for everyone. Sometimes the producer that owns a book or partial book might be at retirement age and that's not feasible. Then it's a buyout. Like if you start need to clean it up and just say, I'm going to exercise an agreement, or I'm going to put an agreement in place so we can buy back those books. Because the challenge is, the agency, when you start pulling out producer-owned books, you change the risk factors inside the agency. So the concentration with carriers changed. The expectations about contingencies change. The concentration in a niche might change. Like, all of these risk factors can be impacted. It's not just that there's a producer-owned book, but the complexion of what you have the ability to sell becomes different.
And with greater complexity brings a much more challenging acquisition process. The buyer is going to be very uncomfortable if they have a harder time understanding it. Yeah. And it's harder weighing out the risk after the sale. So that makes sense.
Yeah, and no buyer wants to negotiate with 4. Like, they want to negotiate with 1, and certainly not minority ownerships. The other thing is, as a buyer, am I creating a competitive environment for what I think I need to retain, so that agency, that seller, could get a discounted price because there's uncertainty. If you clean it up in advance, that's no longer there, which is great. But yeah, it's hard to imagine until you're at the place where you want to sell, and when you wait that long, then it's really hard to fix because you need time.
I like that you said earlier that you would prefer connecting with someone well in advance of any type of exit, because you're so right. If you can work through a lot of that over years, it's much easier, it's much more manageable, and it ultimately drives much better results long term when you do exit. The last piece was one I didn't want to forget. It was the influence that an aggregator or network contract can have on the asset value. And we see that all the time too. There's certain contracts that are very producer and agent friendly. And there are some that are very clawy. And maybe you could touch on what a less flexible, more teethy, clawy, contract could look like, and why.
Yeah, so they're not all created equal, and I don't want anyone listening to this to think that I'm, not pro aggregator. I am. I think they have a incredible role inside our industry, but those agreements are not all created equal, and those agreements inside an aggregator, cluster, or alliance could look different over time. Like, they don't all have the same contract either, which is kind of crazy. I think you need to look at a couple of things. Do I own my whole book? And if I do, great. Is there an exit fee? That's pretty easy. We can calculate it. You know exactly what it is. Is there a first right of refusal involved? And how am I going to be able to satisfy that first right of refusal? So let's say I want to sell my agency. I'm part of an aggregator that has a first right of refusal. I get some offers. I sign NDAs. I get an LOI, but I've signed an NDA. How do I go back to my aggregator with an agreement that I have agreed that I will not share with anyone and satisfy an LOI? It's a challenge, right?
Tricky.
It's a super tricky challenge. And it slows deals down. It slows the process down. It might make some buyers shy away because they don't want to deal with it. That's another challenge. And then some is, when you place business through someone else's codes, Might there be a competitive for them to hold on to the book that's placed through the aggregator? And do they have the right to solicit that business? As a buyer, I want to know that that is not the case. And if it's nebulous, buyers will discount. Like, buyers only want to pay for the things that they know they have a high certainty of retaining, which makes sense, or they're going to mitigate their risk by making an offer that's lower. So you just need to know, what's the nature of my contract? And prior to it, maybe buy out your contract or exit if there are things that would prevent you from doing that, or choose who your sellers are based on that agreement.
Yeah, I wish you could say that louder.
I know.
There's a microphone that we can like turn up the volume, because that is so insightful and only comes from so much experience of reviewing tons of different contracts, knowing the industry in and out, the influence that a tough contract can have on the business when you are trying to exit, significant. And then there's a lot of contracts that are, like, as you said, very, very plain vanilla. You own the book completely. Maybe there's a set flat fee or a percentage of whatever, and so I know that as an agency owner considering a network or an aggregator, almost no one is thinking about the exit.
No.
Because you are joining
That's not why you're entering.
No, you're joining it to either access more markets, which is probably number one.
Yeah.
Increase commissions and contingents, maybe number two. Adding more resources, education, training opportunities, and
Absolutely.
And you're not thinking, this contract could influence my exit value.
Never. That's not part of the decision making, but it should be. Yeah, absolutely. So tell me, we've talked a lot today, and I'd love to know, what's the biggest win for your team? Like, what do you guys you've knocked it out of the park? What does that look like for you?
I'd say one of the things that we're most proud of is the number of our former clients, or at least the ratio of our former clients who are still really happy with the decision they made of who they sold to. We believe that we play a pivotal role in the partnership that they choose, just as much, if not more, than the financial outcomes that are generated. Because squeaking out like a few $1 million more for a family-owned business in a rural setting in America is a great feeling. And I'd say when we started this, that was why what I thought was going to be most fulfilling. And it is, but knowing that a year later, 2 years later, 3 years later, they are really happy with the decision they made. And that doesn't mean that it was a perfect decision, or that everything is like hunky-dory, but they were very aware of the bed that they were making and they were getting into, and they were intentional about it, and they feel like they vetted out all their options and they made the best decision for them. That feels great that we played a big role in that, because there's a lot of agency owners that go through and sell, and they get great financial outcomes, and then day two they're not happy. They feel like they sold to the wrong group for the wrong reasons, and they feel like their team isn't excited and interested in continuing, and that stinks, right? And so I think helping our clients avoid that level of regret and concern is something that's extremely meaningful and makes the job that we do very fulfilling.
Yeah.
I would turn it around and ask you, in terms of what you're most proud of, what's so fulfilling about the role that you play in these agency owners' lives.
Yeah, it's interesting when you ask me that question. I think about specific agents that have impacted me maybe as much as we've impacted them, and there's a couple of them. Like, I love seeing an internal transition happen, and not only the transition happen, but the exiting owner feels confident about the decision they made. The incoming owner may engage us as their fractional CFO because they've never run a business before, and they've got confidence to make some decisions. And they both are super happy with how the performance of the agency continues. So that's one in particular that, you go and you say, listen, these are great people. They know how to run this business. They've built an incredible business, but by bringing our talent to them, they are both incredibly happy with the impact that we've made. That's pretty cool, right? There's others though that never would have acquired. Like, they couldn't pull the trigger to acquire, and now they've got 5 acquisitions under their belt, and they're really seeing the trajectory of their agency be at a different place. Again, we gave them the confidence. gave them the clarity to make that decision. We didn't make the decision for them, but we certainly positioned them to be able to do some of the things that maybe they weren't doing. And then there's some that, when they came to us, we had to give them really not so great information when we did their valuation, and we uncovered some of the things that we talked about. And now they're at the point that they're selling, and they've got wide variety of options ahead of them, that they feel prepared and they feel a whole lot better about the position they're in. So I think, we come into someone's life and they trust us. That's pretty cool in and of itself. The number of people that trust you to see things about their business that maybe aren't ideal, and then you're able to actually leave them better than you found them, is a pretty rewarding thing.
It requires a level of vulnerability that is very appealing and attractive to be around.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have to say, I'm grateful that for this industry for a lot of reasons. I think knowing that this industry brought me to meet you, and when we met, and how close our friendship has been over the last number of years, to know what you do and what we do are so aligned and supportive of the industry, that I feel like I've been able to get so much from. It's just a great feeling, and I'm so confident in the work that you and your team does, and I'm excited to continue to watch you grow and create so much more impact for hundreds and thousands of agencies out there that really do need the support. And whether they know it today or they wake up in a year or 10 years and know it, they'll definitely benefit a tremendous amount from Agency Focus and the work you do.
I appreciate that. I love that we're doing it alongside each other. I think it's pretty cool. Our teams are aligned, and it's fun. I love making the impact that we're making. And I think back to when I first met you, and I had no idea, honestly, that what you had done or what your history was. But man, it's been pretty cool building alongside of you.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Insurance Refocused podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please be sure to hit subscribe and leave us a review so you'll never miss us. Want to learn more about how Agency Focus can help you grow your agency? Head to agency-focus.com or email Carey directly at carey@agency-focus.com. If you need to get in touch with me, feel free to shoot me an email at lindsay@agency-focus.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week.